Question 2. Please define the 5 components of language and discuss the differences in the language skills of a 3-year-old versus a 16-year-old child. Be sure to consider the situational context. Okay, so as I understand this question, it's asking for me to define the 5 components of language and how they apply to the language skills of a younger child versus an adolescent. The 5 areas of language are defined as phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And phonology is how sounds work together in a language. Typically, 3-year-olds are still learning how to process and use sounds in their native language. Some of the learning goes on until they're 6 or 7. They may have started to understand how to rhyme or how to break apart words into syllables. A 16-year-old, on the other hand, will be using phonology in their reading and writing skills, and also they're going to be using it in conversation in a more complex way. They'll likely be doing work beyond basic decoding, and they'll have moved on to learning how to use phonology to predict spelling patterns in more complex words and to be able to talk about those patterns. They should have some metacognition about the basic patterns found in their language at this point, and they should be able to manipulate the sounds. They can do things like, for example, writing poetry using alliteration or repeating syllable patterns, such as, coming up with a sonnet, for example, or haiku. Morphology is the study of word structure. It describes how words are formed out of the more basic elements of language. Those are called morphemes. Morphemes can be free or they can be bound, depending on if they can stand alone. For example, as a standalone word like the word ocean or the word color, and they're considered bound if they're attached within a word, such as a prefix or suffix, like the plural s in oceans, or the ed in colored past tense. In terms of morphology, a 3-year-old is likely still to be learning more of the basic skills, such as how to apply past tense by adding the ed to verbs, or present progressive with the ing added to verbs, or plurals where he or she would add the s or the z after a noun. A 16-year-old, on the other hand, probably already has most of their morphology, from their dialect anyway, learn well enough for conversation, and is able to use it in reading and writing, and is able to talk about it metacognitively. Syntax has to do with the rules related to the arrangement of words in a particular order, and how they go together to make meaningful sentences in a particular language. Most children tend to have the basic syntax of their language learned by the time they're about 5, meaning the 3-year-old is still going to be learning the rules, such as how to ask a question, or make a statement, or give a command. Me want cookie. Go get cookie. 16-year-olds, though, are more likely to be using metacognition again, and more complex conversation to learn the subtle rules of grammar, such as how to create and use active versus passive sentences. I'm still working on that now. And complex sentences, which tend to be made up of clauses, or how to discuss parts of a sentence when in a classroom. For an example of a compound sentence, it would be something like, the policeman held up the sign, that's a clause, and, a conjunction, the car stopped, another clause. They need these skills to be able to read and write, and to be able to proofread their writing and the writing of other people. Semantics is the study of meaning in language, and it can relate to the meanings in words, phrases, sentences, and longer passages in conversation. 3-year-olds are still working on basic vocabulary, like dog, cat, baby, and basic verbs, go, sit, run, while 16-year-olds should be able to manipulate semantics to understand how words fall into categories, like these are kinds of animals, this is types of verbs, as well as having greater world knowledge to have a much larger vocabulary than a 3-year-old, unless they're locked in a closet. 3-year-olds tend to both underextend and overextend their use of words, like thinking dog might mean all 4-legged animals that live in the home. That would be an That would be an underextension. Actually, no. That would be an overextension. An underextension would be, dog only refers to this one dog. But a 16-year-old rarely will underextend and overextend their use of at least common words. That's only really likely to happen with very new vocabulary they don't fully understand. And they should be able to have dictionary skills and other ways of finding out the actual meaning of the words they're using. In addition, they're likely to interpret words within the situations where the words themselves occur. That would be situational context, which I'll discuss a little more under pragmatics. And speaking of which, pragmatics is the study of rules that govern the use of language in social situations. This is where situational context really comes into play. Older children are far more likely than younger children to understand the importance of the setting where language is being used, and they can actively shift their understanding of an utterance and their use of language to match the environment. For example, the use of indirect speech in Eastern cultures is thought to convey sophistication, while the Western cultures, it might make a person seem really unassertive and unsure of themselves. Younger children, like 3-year-olds, are far less aware of their environment, and they tend to use the same register regardless of their situations.